a PubMed search and showed that a lot of these comorbidities, they don't come out of the sky. They come from somewhere, and it's all about the terrain theory, Claude Bernard forwarded, and then the germ theory that Louis Pasteur forwarded. But what's underappreciated in medicine is the stealth of the chronic, or the stealth infections. And when you have a virus, it's quote unquote an infection, SARS. And what it tends to do is it tends to expose latent pre-existing infections. And if that's not addressed, I think you're going to have a hard time recovering from it. And then the other part of it is deactivating that spike protein.
Yeah.
And so we have a number of strategies. So it's, there's many legs to the stool, but the two main ones are, like Dr. Carter said, do labs to find out what's really going on and where you are on what we call the health disease continuum. Correct all the things surrounding those labs that are risks that drive those. Then, looking for these subacute infections, and then deactivating the spike protein. So those are sort of the three components that we're going to and already do kind of address with people.
Right. And I'll tell you one of the things, because I've probably treated over 800 COVID patients to date, and a good number of long haulers and post-vaccine injury. What I've found though now, well, one of the critical things to test for, as you may very well be aware of, is CD4 and CD8 levels. And I'm finding in 80 to 90% of those who've had the shot, their CD8 levels are really, really low or below normal. And of course, those being your natural killer cells. And not only do they have, the key, frontline workhorse duty of keeping pathogens at bay, of course, they also have the duty of keeping cancer cells at bay. So, so strategies to reboot, the immune strength, which can be done, definitely, but again, it's still kind of like peeling back the layers of the onion. So some of the strategies, promoted by, let's say, the FLCC, which I'm, one of the doctors of as well, and they have a decent, post-vaccine injury and long haul protocol, but again, it's still kind of a, everyone is the same, kind of mentality. So I look at, again, what is unique to that patient, and what hurdles might I need to overcome to then, number one, like Dr. Lewis was saying, how do you suppress the body's ability to continue making this spike protein? And of course, none of us really know how long it's being made, but there's certainly several things that can help, bind it up, and so forth. But the other key point is, what has it suppressed in each individual's system that's preventing the body from healing? And then I think that's where we kind of shine, not to say that we're the only ones out there, of course, but, a lot of people do come to us that have gone to a lot of other practitioners. We also specialize in reversing Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia. And again, even though I'm a Bredesen trained doctor, he wrote the second book, The End of Alzheimer's. Dr. Lewis wrote the first book. Again, we get a lot of those patients, from practitioners out there who still have missed some very key things. So at any rate.
Good.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, and certainly I think you'll see in my talk, there are a lot of parts of my talk will certainly support just what you've said about how individualized. I mean, first of all, these syndromes are pretty massive.
Yes. Not
well defined. In treatment, frankly, has to be somewhat individualized.
Absolutely.
So I think you'll see my talk will reflect a lot of what you just said.
Okay, good.
Michael, let's get started. You can go, but before you do that, I just want to give people a heads up that I'm working on 2 webinar topics that you may be interested in. Number one, to follow up on the energy medicine talks I'm going to put together a talk on sound therapy and what's the difference between sound and light. It's actually a fairly complex discussion because there's not really a good sort of good level of out there on the difference. And the other thing I'm going to talk about, it may not be a full presentation, but will be on what is the liposomal delivery process and when do I think it has value versus when I think it's an unnecessary delivery modality. So you might find that interesting because I know the liposomal supplements are a lot more expensive than the non-liposomal version. So, you know, in my philosophy of questioning everything, and I just did another Worcester Polytechnical Institute grad, and I was discussing, he said, what did you, because he was a sword fighter, he did fencing. He said, what did you do? I said, I was a member of the Skeptical Chemist Society. So that was back in 1977. So, but that skepticism is something we all obviously need to enhance right now because everything is to be every single thing. And with that, Dr. Carter, why don't you introduce Joel, because I know now he's from experience, he's questioning things in a big way.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I reached out to Dr. Joel a little while ago. Of course, you know, as you guys all know, we go to a lot of these, you know, freedom rallies and conferences that really, you know, bring to light what's really happening out there. And, you know, all of the, you know, well-known speakers, Robert Kennedy, Judy Mikovits, Lee Merrick, just Dr. Peter McCulloch. There's a whole long list of people that, you know, we've been able to meet in person, we've had dinner with. And so we've been on, Dr. Lewis and I've been on this journey for quite some time. And of course, at these conferences, we also meet a few of the vaccine injured people. So, and the ones that I'm most familiar with are, you know, what Dr. Joel has created is React 19, and then the real, not rare, but there are others, and there are several others that, of course, were pretty massive online on Facebook that have, of course, been shadow banned for one reason or another and broken up and so forth. So anyway, I wanted to have Dr. Joel come on and, of course, tell us about his organization, and because they definitely need our support, and yeah, just wanted to have him share what his experience has been and what's going on now.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Carter, Dr. Lewis, and all the providers and people at Health Revival Partners for having me. It's really an honor to be here today. My goal is really threefold today. One, I'll introduce myself. I have to admit, I don't really like telling my personal story, but I do. I always say I was professionally very extroverted, you know, at a large orthopedic surgery practice. Personally, I'm pretty introverted, so I don't really enjoy telling my story, but I think it's sometimes important to hear some of our stories. Second of all, I want to explain to you a little bit about React 19. React 19 is the nonprofit organization that Brianne Dressler and I are really co-chairs of. And really, what is our mission? What are we trying to accomplish? And lastly, I want to review a little bit about some, what I would say is relevant research about COVID shot injuries. Again, I may say the word vaccine. Obviously, I don't really call the COVID shots as a traditional vaccine, so I make a mistake and call it a vaccine, as it does not prevent infection or transmission. I apologize. I usually try to say COVID shots or jab. But thank you very much for having me. So I'm a 53-year-old Midwesterner by background. I had an orthopedic practice. I had a very large practice. Saw about 6,000 patients per year. In clinic, I did about 900 surgical procedures per year. So it's definitely a very, very busy practice. I was on a hamster wheel. I didn't really think much about anything except working and coming home to my family. In 2020, as part of a surveillance study in the summer, I got antibody tested for COVID and I was negative. It was just a surveillance study through my employer. Move forward a couple of months into September, everyone in my orthopedic team started going out sick with COVID, but I kept working. So after a while, I said to myself, how did every single person in my clinic get COVID, but not me? So then I decided, knowing that I was antibody negative several months before, I went and got antibody tested and I was positive. So at that point, I made that, I think, logical conclusion that I had really asymptomatic infection, or at least I was exposed per se. Again, I was part of the hamster wheel, didn't really think, trusted the system that I worked for my whole life. I was certainly aware of Tuskegee and other things where maybe we shouldn't always trust our government. But I'll be honest with you, I looked up on the computer and said, what do I do? I went to the CDC website. I did give some thought to the idea of natural immunity, but it said, at that point, wait 90 days and get your shot. Well, I was thinking about it a little bit and wondering if I should, and just said, oh, I just got exposed, or I really need to get a shot. But then a good friend of mine, who was very otherwise healthy, prior college football player, got COVID, got all the wrong treatment, got diagnosed way into his disease, got intubated early, got trached, no steroids, almost died, everything, no early treatment. And I'll be honest with you, that was right about Christmas. And I'll be honest with you, that freaked me out a little bit. So in a somewhat reactionary way, on December 30th, I went and got my first Moderna shot. It was completely uneventful, went home. But about 7 days later, I mentioned to my wife when I was trying to get out of bed, I said, Megan, my feet are numb. And, it was pretty significant. And, that sensation of paresthesia is, ascended proximally as I'd walk more during the day. Several days passed, and then I started falling. And then clearly I knew something was wrong. I figured I got a brain, and at that point, I was not remotely thinking about the shot. I figured I got a brain tumor, I got something weird going on. So being in the position I'm in, I literally just called, and when I fell at work, I called my wife and said, I'm getting an MRI. I could just go ahead and order the MRI and call the MRI center and said, I'm coming. Versus, most people where that takes 3 to 6 months to get into a doctor, get a diagnosis, get testing. Literally, I had a diagnosis within 24 hours, and my diagnosis was transverse myelitis. I've had a world of other symptoms since then, and finally, after 22 months, I got another diagnosis of dysautonomia, which explains, my headaches, my hypertension, now my kidney problems, fatigue, you name it. So at this point, my diagnosis is really transverse myelitis and dysautonomia. Now, if you ask my true opinion, I went on IVIG and very high dose steroids, got no improvement. I'll be honest with you, if you ask my opinion, I really think I had a forward infarct. But at this point, in the end, it doesn't really matter. I have a demyelinated lesion of my anterior cord at the T18 level. I went through all of the stages of grief in 2021. Didn't know what I was going to do at first. My neurologist told me to take 2 or 3 months off, and I reluctantly agreed to take 2 weeks off. I went back to work after 2 weeks, tried to operate 2 partial days, but that ended me up in bed, really bedridden for 3 to 5 days. So at that point, I realized that I was chronically ill, and I never really got better from a motor standpoint. And really, I've just learned a new normal. It is definitely not easy. I admit I struggled in 2021 because I was very passionate about what I did. I love taking care of people. And I was lost. And then what happened is I got invited actually to go to a press conference out in DC held by Senator Johnson in November of 2021. And at that point, I met about 10 other injured people. And at that point, I finally realized I wasn't alone. I mean, when you're injured, especially early on, it was a very much one word would characterize my experience, which is just abandonment. You just have no idea. You feel like you're alone. Everyone, just tries to shun you and censor you. They look at you like you're crazy. I literally will tell you, I know exactly how it feels to be gaslit because I've been gaslit by numerous providers, even though I'm very much, I was part of their system my entire life. But that's what kind of created us or helped us to form React 19. So React 19, our mission, what is our mission? It's really to provide, it's an injured run organization, which is here to provide the injured hope and support. And we really have three arms of our mission. One is to give them financial support when needed. Another is to give them physical support. And lastly, our last mission is to give them emotional support. I'll go over our mission in a little bit more detail. So really, our mission is threefold. One is to provide financial support, then physical support, and emotional support. So this is Doug Cameron, who is a cattle farmer out in Idaho. He had one Pfizer shot, and he's paraplegic from transverse myelitis. So we formed React 19 after we left that press conference in DC. We formed it as a Wisconsin-based corporation because I live here. And then we, filed for formal 501(c) status, which we have now. We are very science-based. And why do we try to do that? Because everyone wants to censor us. And basically what we found is that if we can stay as objective and data-driven as possible, it just gives less food to those or fuel to those who want to censor us. We're very grassroots. We literally started with 10 people from that press conference, and now, unfortunately, we represent well over 21,000 people in the United States that are injured by the COVID shots. We have numerous international partners, but I think we're actually probably the largest, nonprofit advocacy organization for the shot injured in the world. We are a non-political organization, but let me talk a little bit about the caveats to that. However, we recognize that we're in a highly politicized environment. But truly, the injuries don't care if you're libertarian, Republican, or Democrat. But what I tell people, I'm traditionally from a very red background. However, Brianne Dressen, who is my co-chair of React 19, she's a lifelong registered Democrat. It just doesn't matter. A little bit more about the financial support. So we created what's called a care fund through very grassroots, no corporate sponsorship. We raised about, it's almost $900,000 in the first 14 months. And we give that money right back. We give it back to the injured in the form of a care fund. So the care fund is a financial grant program where we give up to $10,000 to US residents that are injured by the shots for uncovered medical expenses. Now, for a lot of us, you may not think $10,000 is a lot, but it can be life-changing. And let me tell you a quick story. There's a girl named Riley out in New York who was misdiagnosed with functional neurological disorder, which is a diagnosis that drives me absolutely crazy.
Oh, yeah.
She was admitted to an inpatient psych unit for 3 weeks. And we're pretty proactive. So we got involved in her care and got her a correct diagnosis, which is actually CIDP. And because IVIG is, quote, experimental and not covered, we got her $10,000 for IVIG, and she got better. She got out of the wheelchair, got out of diapers, and went back to school in September. So I always say we are not scared to get our toes, and our hands wet. I was literally just working on trying to get a kid in a hospital in Berlin, Germany, IVIG and a correct diagnosis over their prior diagnosis of functional neurological disorder. So we are very more than willing to get involved, and the financial program really has helped some of these people dramatically. The grants can be repeated every 6 months. We have a formal grant process. It's each application is redacted. It's the personal identifying information is redacted. We have a small team of 3 that reviews every application, and then the subgroup of that small team then presents each application to the entire board for a full vote. Physical support. And some of you have joined, which thank you. We have created a medical provider network. Why have we done that? Well, it's because of the gaslighting. It's almost 95% of us, when we go to see a provider, either they think we're nuts, they don't believe us, or they have no idea what to look for. and sometimes I blame that on the federal agencies and the healthcare organizations that don't communicate with their providers what to look for. But again, we need a medical provider network, and we're developing it. I admit it's growing slowly, but I'd rather have quality people and grow it slowly with providers like yourselves, rather than just throw people on a list. We are also very kind of what I would say is possessive and very possessive of the injured, and we don't want them, the injured, to be mistreated. So we are a little bit possessive, as I would say. We've also created a mental health provider network. I think we have well over 200 to 250 people in the medical provider network, but I think we're in the 50 range for the mental health provider network. That's growing slowly also, but consistently. The mental health network needs of the injured are great and really unmet. First of all, a lot of us are misdiagnosed as a primary psychiatric disorder. I can tell you Brianne Dressen's story. She was part of the Pfizer trial. Part of the AstraZeneca trial. She got one shot. She was basically paraplegic after, couldn't control her bladder, got admitted. I've read her discharge summary. Her primary discharge diagnosis is anxiety disorder. And then if you go into the AstraZeneca trial data, she doesn't exist. Why? Because she only got one of the 2 trial shots. So her data is gone.
Wow.
But regardless, the mental health provider network is very, I always say the way we get censored and gaslit, it's anxiety producing in itself. So the mental health needs are significant. We do a lot of research. We've done a fair amount of surveys, which I'm going to show you today because we have data and the people, but we're starting up a $2 million research fund. We want to be the grantor of research to other institutions. So we started up, we have a $100,000 seed money, but we want to be the grantor to U.S. or international research looking specifically at COVID shot injuries. As you know, there's certainly a fair amount of research being started up with regards to long haulers, but really somewhat limited with regards to the COVID shot injuries. And I'll talk to you a little bit about our ongoing research that we've been involved with. We also are very much in education. We hold educational webinars for the injured, but we also hold webinars, we call virtual rounds for providers, which are all welcome to attend if you ever want to attend. And some of you may have already done that. Continuing with physical support. This year, we're trying to be more aggressive. We want COVID injury specific clinics in the United States. And we're seeking funding. We'd like to get 3, but I'll be realistic. If I can get 1 open this year, I'm pretty happy. We're getting pretty close to the needed $1 million funding through a single source. And we're thinking about perhaps opening one in the Texas area, actually in the Fort Worth area. So we're working on that. But again, the challenge is obviously financing. Emotional support. So with regards to emotional support, unfortunately, I always say that we represent well over 21,000 people injured by the COVID shots, and we house them primarily in social media-based support groups. Unfortunately, as you all know, censorship is an issue. We played the game with all the different, social media. Facebook really closed us down for a while, but then now have been much nicer in the last, I would say, 6 to 12 months. Unfortunately, now we've had to add a bereavement group for parents and family of dead children. The other thing we started was an advocacy program. The advocacy program is a group of primarily nurses, but also some social workers that can be assigned to a newly diagnosed injured person who really need more intensive one-on-one help. What we've found is for those people that are marginalized before their injury, whether it be little financial support, they're not working, you name it. If they're marginalized before, the disabling effects, both physically and emotionally, or physically and mental health wise, exponentially worse. And those are the people that really can be in dire trouble. And literally the advocacy program can be a lifeline. Sometimes it's helping them find a provider, finding a prescription, where to get their ivermectin filled. Sometimes it's form help for disability forms, financial resources, housing issues. But really the advocacy program has grown exponentially, but desperately needed for, I would say, fortune of the injured community. Now, I don't know if anybody you know who this is. This is the fearless Peter Marks, who's the head of biologics at the FDA. He's not my favorite. But anyway, while we're a nonprofit, and we obviously do not sponsor or support any given political party or any given political candidate, we do speak on the injured behalf, particularly to the federal agencies, to the FDA, to the CDC, NIH, and to our politicians. Why? Really, there's two big things that we need as an injured community. Number one, oversight and investigation. There are some crazy things that have happened in the last couple of years that a lot of you would be shocked. And I'll tell you this, one of the most common adverse events is the neurologic adverse events. But to this day, the FDA and CDC does not readily acknowledge safety signals regarding the neurological events. Well, early in 2021, the NIH, under Dr. Arvin Nath, flew out 23 neurologically injured shot people, housed them at the NIH, studied them, made treatment protocols, and I'll talk a little bit about that study specifically, sent them back home, communicated with their local providers, and helped guide treatment. To this day, the FDA does not acknowledge that little secret study that the NIH did. The study of 23 people, 13 of them are within REACT, and we know all of them, was quietly just shut down, and no one else will communicate about it. But yet, still to this day, the FDA doesn't recognize the safety signals of the neurological injuries, despite this little quiet secret study that occurred at the NIH early in 2021. So things like that, we need oversight and investigation. We hope that moves forward in the House this year. The other thing, obviously, is we need compensation. And these people that are injured, I'm lucky. I'm one of the less than 1% of people part of the community that I have a lot of disability policies that I bought independently. But that's rare. I fight for these people because they have nothing.
The spouse needs in this. So this is a retention opportunity that if they utilize.
But, the CICP is probably all of you know, historically, if you have a traditional fully FDA-approved vaccine injury, you can apply for the VICP, which is a vaccine injury compensation program. Because the EUA, we are not able to seek financial remedy through the VICP, and yet have to go to the countermeasures injury compensation program. The CICP, I think, has paid out like 5 claims, and it's a horrible system. Number one, the deadline to file is 1 year. For many of us, we don't have a diagnosis within a year. It's ridiculous. There's no attorney fees that can be paid, so therefore attorneys don't want to help us. It's not a judicial review process. The HHS is the judge, the jury, and the adjudicator. It's ridiculous. If you look at the CICP program of the HHS, historically 94% of their annual revenue goes to their own overhead. Only 6% historically goes to the injured. It's really a ridiculous system. And the burden of proof is based on available current science and medical knowledge. The problem is COVID's new, it's the pandemic. We don't know. So the only claims they're paying out right now are blood clots, anaphylaxis, and myocarditis. Like, as I was saying, they're not paying out. My claim was already done. It took me 19 months to get it denied. Why? Because transverse myelitis and the neurological complications have not been, according to available science and medical knowledge, which they determined what that is. They won't acknowledge it. So therefore my claim was denied. And unfortunately, tons of people are going to get denied. It's just a ridiculous system.
Wow.
So I'll accelerate a little bit and talk a little bit, and I'm going to go fairly quickly about some of the research we've done, but also some of the just highlighted research that we value. So we've done two fairly large surveys. These are case series. One was 508 people. One was like 10,050 people. And what we found is majority of the adverse events from the COVID shots are female. We found 81% were female. And the average age is somewhere between 35 and 50. So the vaccine injury brand, you know, and this is kind of corresponds to the majority of what was used here in the United States. Certainly Moderna, as we know, has a higher incidence, probably has the highest incidence in the end of adverse events, but certainly Moderna and Pfizer are the top two. You know, the graph or the pie chart on the right always disturbs me. Obviously, I mean, you have an adverse event, 65% after your first dose, and then look at the 12% that actually already had an adverse event and then got a second shot. Stories break my heart when you read some of these applicants where they had an adverse event, they went back to their provider and they were told, oh, it's a series of two, you have to go ahead with the second one. It's absolutely, utterly heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So this survey was good, and you know, because we did it early on in the pandemic. So I want you to focus a little bit on, you know, these are people on the left. You'll see, did they have a previous vaccine reaction to some other vaccine? The answer is no. In the middle, it's very important. This is important because we were picking up survey data before everyone had COVID. You know, if you look at, you know, kids now, you know, the seroprevalence rate in kids is like somewhere like 96, 97%. But when we were asking these questions about adverse events, 76% had never tested positive for COVID before. And again, 47% did not have any pre-existing conditions. Symptoms. And this is a little bit, Dr. Carter, what you were talking about is, you know, it's a whole constellation of symptoms. You know, the
Absolutely.
average number of symptoms reported by a vaccine or a shot injured person is 20.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really this large constellation of symptoms. And we have yet, in my opinion, really often we have yet to define all of the syndromes. And perhaps, you know, like you said, it's difficult and you have to treat every person individually.
Yes.
72% of the people that had adverse events, their adverse events started within the first 5 days. And if you look, this graph on the right is just to give you an idea. When did the symptoms improve? Well, most times the symptoms improve within the first 6 months. However, it's really, really critical to understand that there's a lot of people that have injured, and I'm one of them. They never got better. And there's a lot of us that didn't get better. I don't want to keep people from having hope. I think, you know, they can have hope. A lot of people with myocarditis can recover. They may have some residual, you know, cardiac scar, but again, they can recover. At the same point, there's a lot of people that just unfortunately don't get better. I know this is overwhelming, but this just highlights the idea of these are the symptoms, and there's just a ton. And how do you make sense of all that? How do we kind of get those organized into more logical diagnostic syndromes, if that makes sense? The top 20 symptoms, let me just start with just really the top 5. Fatigue, definitely. You know, I can just tell you personally, fatigue is tough. Exercise intolerance. One of the worst things to do is to tell your injured patients to go into aggressive physical therapy program because it'll be counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
Brain fog. I can tell you, you know, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'm not the dumbest. I went to a grocery store early on during this experience. I said to myself, I had to get 4 things. I said to myself the 4 things before I got out of the car to go in the grocery store. I got in the grocery store and I couldn't remember those 4 things. It was quite humbling. Now, this is what me trying to get to an idea of, you have the symptoms, okay, on the right, and then we're trying to organize them into more of the common diagnoses or syndromes. And again, I'm going to share all these slides later. I also have, there's also literature references that you can click on. So don't feel like you have to write anything down. So how have their injuries affected their quality of life? Pretty significantly. Remember, this is the survey that was done within the first year after their adverse event. 11% were bedbound. half were unable to exercise, 30% unable to work. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And if you ask the people in follow-up, at a year out, 19% said they're saying the same, 30% were improving, 20% evolving, and I would be in one of those, 21% getting worse. So if
Trying
you
to
ask,
retain what we do have and trying to attract the new ones that we
people,
can. This is one of our
Sorry about that. We have lots of people on.
so if you ask people where we did in their survey, if you could get rid of one symptom, what would it be? It's painful neuropathy, which is ironic because still to this day, the FDA and CDC doesn't recognize neuropathy as an adverse event or doesn't recognize it as a safety signal for an adverse event. Now, we were early on with our survey data showing, the gender distribution, but this has recurrently been found in other different surveys since ours. PVS in Germany, the Vigibase, VSafe, Pfizer's own post-marketing study. And if you look, more female and really in that younger 30 to 50 range. Safety signals. I have had so many, Bree and I have had so many conversations with Peter Marks and his team. They continue to say the only safety signals they've seen are blood clots, again, anaphylaxis, and myocarditis, although myocarditis was just after 6 cases. But again, when you FOIA these people, more and more things interestingly come out. And now, after a recent FOIA, they found 770 plus safety signals. It's really kind of crazy just how they've slowly dribbled out more information. In fact, we tape everything when we audio record everything, and they let it slip. They said there's absolutely no safety signals for neurological complications. But then during the discussion we had with them, they said, well, with women between 30 and 40, there is. But again, more information is more, we get more data as more FOIAs and Freedom of Information Acts, come out. So how rare is it? Again, what is the definition of rare? I would say certainly much less than 1%, but in my opinion, the adverse events, I don't know the true incidence because I don't have true and transparent data, but I can definitely look at some studies. If you look at the VA comparative safety analysis study, combined when you look at hematological disorders, arrhythmias, and neurological disorders, we're talking in the range of, 8-9%. We have the vaccine study that was 1 in 800 suffered a serious adverse event. If you look at the VSafe data, VSafe was just a spot where 10 million people that got the shot, and unfortunately, 780,000 or almost 7.8% of those people had to seek medical care after the vaccination. Now, I have to give you a little disclaimer to that. They had to seek medical care within a year after their shot. So what was the exact medical care for? We don't know. However, 21 to 33% were unable to participate in work, school, or daily activities within the first month after their shot. Okay. Now, there are over 3,000 studies on COVID adverse events or shot adverse events, and we have 1,250 of them on our website. It is being updated to 3,000, and we're going to have it searchable and researchable. So if anyone wants to look at that, should be updated within the next several weeks. But right now we have 1,250 studies listed. MIS, we have really been pushing, and I won't go into this too much detail, but we've really been pushing very hard on MIS-V. When we meet with Peter Marks, he will admit, and they are warning about MIS-C with COVID, but similarly, they won't take the similar a stance on MIS-V. And unfortunately, as you know, MIS-V and MIS-C can be very fatal and cause serious, morbidity and mortality, particularly in teens and young adults. Early recognition and treatment is essential. Cardiovascular complications. I won't go this. You guys know this. Myocarditis, pericarditis, blood clotting, endothelial dysfunction, sudden heart failure. I won't go into this too much detail, but again, I have some link studies for any of you that would like to take a look at those. It's a little bit interesting when you look at cardio and neural research. Again, a little bit of gender differences. If you see in men, certainly much higher incidence of myocarditis. And then when you go to women, much higher incidence, particularly of POTS. Neuropathy, you know, I tell you, I can't tell you how many times I get patients that, you know, say that they describe a history of POTS, they describe a history of small fiber neuropathy, but yet all of their testing that's been done by their providers like EMG and MRI have all been normal. And it's not until we kind of encourage them to start getting more specific tests like the skin punch biopsy or the autonomic tilt table testing or more autoimmune tests. These people sometimes need to get a positive test of something. And why? Because number one, to the injured person, it proves that to themselves, they're not crazy, but also to the provider that's seeing them, the same, that a lot of times getting an objective abnormality like small fiber neuropathy on a skin punch biopsy can be very helpful in getting the person diagnosed and frankly believed and acknowledged and treated. Again, small fiber neuropathy historically affects older men, but in post, you know, vax world, it's really women and men, women more than men, but much younger, 30 to 50 age range. This is a little bit what I was referring to. This is the NIH preprint study that's out there. These are the 23 people that were silently, quietly studied, tested, and treated at the NIH early in 2021. If any of you want this, I think the source is on here. It's available in preprint, was never published. But this is the NIH themselves early in 2021, evaluating people with neuropathy after the shots. And what they found is that immunotherapy people treated with IVIG really did the best. And for those certainly with steroids did well, but if they didn't get, or if they had recalcitrant symptoms after the steroids, if they were then treated with IVIG, they did quite amazingly well. Now, I warn you, if you look at the study, they'll say that, oh my God, everyone now is doing great and everyone resolved. And I can personally tell you, because we know 13 of the 23, that is not the case, and most of them are having chronic symptoms. Like this referring to a neurology study published in 2021. Neurology admits in this article to all of these other problems, strokes, tinnitus, trigeminal neuralgia, the neuropathies, dysautonomia, etc., other neurological complications. But yet, to this day, the CDC and FDA only admits to the safety signals of blood clotting, anaphylaxis, and myocarditis. And again, time is of the essence, and that's why early intervention is the key, and it drives me crazy. The last time I spoke to Peter Marks is I was basically pleading to him, even if he sees a trend, to communicate the trend to the healthcare organizations, the providers, because ignoring these people and delaying their care is only going to decrease their outcome. We're very much involved in some other research that's going on. If any of you are interested, the Harlan, Dr. Iwasaki and Krumholtz, the Yale Kindred study, very interesting. There's a UCSF PROVE study, a Marburg study, long hauler vaccine survey. These are all very interesting, ongoing studies that we've been involved with through React 19. What are we looking to in the future? We're working on trying to get a genomic study, biomarker study to look for potential tests or identify similar positive tests and classify syndromes. We're also working to get a microclot study going. So if any of you have any specific interest in these projects, please let me know. Now, in general, when we see these syndromes, we kind of, in our minds, break it down into etiology. We put it in 3 different buckets. There's the allergic bucket, that includes the anaphylactic group, but also the MCAS group, it's the autoimmune group. And then lastly, it's the inflammatory group. And that's how we generally kind of look at possible etiologies. But remember, in their clinical presentation, we often see a huge overlap. And this gets back a little bit again to what Dr. Carter was saying is that Sometimes, you get a little bit more of the inflammatory bucket, a little bit more of the allergic, maybe less autoimmune. And that's where challenge to you as providers is to try to individualize treatment for that individualized person with their unique syndrome.
Right.
And this is our attempt to try to take symptoms and then put them into kind of more common diagnoses, which just again highlights kind of what Dr. Kern was saying. So, diagnostic guide. This isn't meant to be, comprehensive, but I want to let you know that we do put this information up on our website. This is something that we continue to, sometimes providers use it, but we really want to arm the injured to educate themselves. And one of the common things we recommend is the biopsy for people that just don't have a diagnosis and they're told they're crazy when they have, neuropathic symptoms. And again, I won't go over this in great detail, but this is on our website too. So,
Joe, if I could interrupt, where is the diagnostic on your website, a diagnostic protocol?
I can take a look specifically. That's all on there. Let me take a look as we're talking.
I didn't mean to interrupt. We can.
No, that's okay. Might be resources and education. I will find out.
Yeah.
But the diagnostic workup and all that stuff is on our website. So this is just a little pitch about React. We'd love to have any of you get involved as much as you'd like. We're really involved in, community support through our advocacy program. We have international partners. Please, if you're interested, be part of our provider referral network. You guys are instrumental to helping us. We need to collaborate to move forward. We're very much involved in education. We want to educate the injured, but we want to try to educate you if you wish, but also utilize your own expertise to treat, to educate other providers. Here's my little kick for money. We wouldn't exist without, donations. So if you certainly have people that would be interested in, being kind of a philanthropic, donor, we are starting basically a $13 million 3-year campaign, $8 million being assigned to the CARE Fund, $2 million to our newly formed research fund. And we're trying to raise $3 million to start 3 new vaccine injury specific clinics here in the United States. So if you have anybody that's interested in really being a philanthropic donor, please let us know. This is a little bit about, again, we have over 250 providers now. We have, I think, 50 mental health providers as part of our provider and mental health network. And again, if you know people that want to join, all they need to do is go on our website, submit a volunteer submission. We do vet and we do meet with everybody personally for the reasons I already talked about. We are working to connect researchers to patients. We do collaborate. We do events. We are going to, if any of you are interested in doing your own research, again, we did have a $100,000 seed money to our research grant program. And we really want to support your research if any of you have the infrastructure and the desire to do more formal research. We within React can do the kind of case series because we have the numbers, but we really don't have the infrastructure to do more formal research. And that's really not our goal ultimately either. We have a separate, donation platform for our research. This is nothing new. That is all I have. I really appreciate you guys listening, and ladies and gentlemen listening. I'd be glad to take as many questions or comments as you'd like to provide.
Thank you, Dr. Joel. That was quite compelling there. Quite compelling.
Gripping.
Yes.
No question about it. You think there's because your number female to male on your survey is very common in terms of, like, we all recognize that women are like 80% of the healthcare system in terms of being proactive. Do you think there could have been any bias in that in terms of, just more responding truthfully, if you will, when you compare the women and men in that representation of those who were vaccine injured?
Well, I think that's a great point. So certainly, historically, I mean, in healthcare, especially the early people that got shots were in healthcare, and I can specifically comment about my employer. 80% are women. However, the one thing that would speak it about it just being the predominance of females in healthcare is that percentage is held up to subsequent series, including V-Safe, that were done later in people in the general population outside of healthcare. Does that make sense?
Yep. Interesting. Yeah. Let's see. Dr. Stark asked a question, interesting one. What percentage of people discover that they have subjective symptoms and objective signs from the vaccine only months and months later? Or will objective signs only show up when an autopsy is done?
That's a tough one.
You kind of answered that question. You're saying some very large percentage, whether it's 70 or 80, show up in the first 5 days. But, the unknown is what's going to happen 10 years from now, 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I mean, again, first of all, I think there's a ton of people that are injured out there that have no idea that they were injured. Okay. There's a lot of people that just say, "Oh, I had this weird arrhythmia." I mean, look at JJ Watt, a professional football player, who has this weird arrhythmia, but things have just become the new normal. People dropping dead. It's the new normal.
Absolutely.
So I don't know how to answer that, but I just think there's a ton of people out there that are injured that don't know they are. I think the unknown of what's going to happen with regards to any, offspring issues. I mean, if you look at Jim Thorpe's data about some of the, maternal fetal adverse events, I mean, it's alarming. You look at cancer, all the reactivated cancer, new cancer. This is a big unknown. I don't pretend to know all the answers. In fact, I wish our healthcare organization sometimes would say, "I don't know." Those are 3 important words to say. I don't know.
Well, that's one of, like I mentioned earlier, that could be a study in and of itself, following these CD4, CD8 total immunoglobulin levels. Galectin-3 is a kind of an independent marker of inflammation in the body. So these are some of the things that I've been following. And like I said, at least 80%. And, as we know, there are, varied concentrations of all of these shots. Some people get, really highly concentrated batches, and others got all the way down to saline, right? So, so that's another variable that, it kind of confounds the picture. But at the end of the day, from a study standpoint, if you take a large enough sample size, I think that is one of the tests that will show something more long term, especially these CD8 levels, because it's tied in, the innate immunity and tied into so much of, just your immune resilience, and of course all of the other tests that we focus on as well. But that's one of the ones that I really think, in addition to the cytokines, interleukin-6, interleukin-10, 17, all of these other things play a significant role in this as well.
And to follow up on what Dr. Carter said, then Dominic, you can come and ask your question. But see, you have the breadth of labs, but what I wrote, we just finished writing a 2-volume set called Health Freedom Lost, and one of the things I went into in great detail, but I've been talking about this for 15 to 20 years, is we need to look at labs from a chronic perspective. Mm-hmm. And population data is essentially useless that we use to create reference ranges or reference, right, you're going to call them. So what we did, my mentor at Harvard was an ophthalmologist, but he was much more than that. He used the eye as a window into disease. And he told me 20 years ago, it's like the only thing that really matters is the early mortality risk. So what I did on about 30 biomarkers that have give a good indication of inflammation and sort of a chronic perspective is went in and titrated these biomarkers to early mortality risk. And there's actually very, early all-cause mortality. And there's really good data out there. And then what I did is curve fit the thing. So we've created for every of the key biomarkers, sort of a curve that shows you the risk of dying younger than expected, based on the concentration of that biomarker. And from that, you get a very, very different view of labs. And I think that's extraordinarily important because, some are dying suddenly, but a lot of people are suffering, morbidity from this disease. And if you're not looking at biomarkers with that degree of sensitivity, then you say, okay, that marker is okay. And that's what your traditional doctor does. Oh, your labs look normal and slough you off. But in our range, I'll just give you an example. And I put up on the chat a link to the Silicon Valley Health Alliance, where Dr. Carter and I did a very long talk. But the first 20 minutes, we go into the science behind how we determined actual normal ranges versus out of normal ranges, and then optimal ranges. So for example, white blood cell counts, 3,400 to 10,800. In some labs, it's different, it's changing. The lower number is coming up. In our world, you want to be between 4,000 and 5,700. But optimal is 4,400 with a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, the absolute values of 1.3. And that's where I want everybody to wind up. But, and the other thing I'll tell you, Joel, is that I had a bad case of Delta about
11.
14 months ago. And at the height of it, hold on one sec. At the height of it, I went to LabCorp. I had a fever of 103 and took my labs. And it was very revealing, and I'm glad to share those with you because I don't care about HIPAA. But
Yes,
the interesting thing is the white blood cell counts weren't crazy high. What was really high was the ferritin iron ratio. Ferritin and iron, roughly speaking, should be 100 and 100. Roughly. It's actually the ratio, optimal ratio is 0.6. My iron was 14, and my ferritin was 1,300. So my body was trying to keep the virus from replicating by removing free iron from my system. So these are the kinds of things that, and cancer patients almost always have that very high ferritin iron ratio. And it's not a condition where you want to give blood because your ferritin's high. It's from a very different scenario called anemia of chronic inflammation. And I really call it anemia of chronic infection. No one else, they're not really in the standard of care, they're not calling it that, but we got to call it for what it is. But anyway, that's I think it's really important, and we're trying to spread this this good news about interpretation. So I'd be happy to share with you and help people get an appropriate blood panel, but more importantly, the interpretation of it. So like Dr. Carter says, breadth, and he well knows that we also have to consider the depth. In other words, not just looking at it from this kind of perspective, but really zeroing in and seeing the subtlety of the labs. So with that, I shared it. And if you want me to email you that video, the first, it's a 2.5 hour. That's how long the Silicon Valley Health Network or Alliance does. But the first 20 minutes explains in morbid detail, if you will, how we arrived at our scientifically based, because you talked about evidence, and that's a really extraordinarily important thing. And and you're spot on. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, because when the traditional health system marginalizes us, they always say we have the evidence, but you can just look at how reference ranges are defined, and there's not a scientific component to the three considerations of reference ranges, whereas ours is tied to the ultimate outcome, mortality. And with that, Dominic, you want to ask your question? And he was on, but we lost him.
I see that there's Dominic said regarding spreading the word of the FLCCC
Yeah.
Spike Conference. I don't know if they're referring to the Fort Worth Conference for the spring conference of the FLCCC in Fort Worth, I think in April.
Yeah.
And that should be a good event.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
There's so many good conferences, but what's interesting about the FLCCC is that Corey et al., and even McCullough, he's learned a lot from COVID. I mean, he was a traditional doctor applying standard of care properly, but that's not adequate. And so, they still don't have a functional mindset that I can see, but
No, they don't.
they're morphing in that direction. Like McCullough never heard of barrier immunity until COVID, and that's,
Right.
when you look at the data, like I do a lot of detailed stuff like the tuberculosis mortality per population curve, and you see the downward trend in tuberculosis from 1900. And then when you look at when the vaccine or antibiotics were first introduced, it had almost no impact on the change of the trajectory of tuberculosis mortality. And then the vaccine came in and it had no impact on it whatsoever. You'd have to blow up the y-axis tremendously to see any kind of thing. And why was it going down? Hygiene, isolation and protection of people from exposure. And that's really important thing. And I know I got a certificate in industrial hygiene, and I know enough now. I knew enough to start with that the masks aren't protecting you from these microparticles or whatever they are. But anyway, that's our stance. But but I think the FLCCC had contributed, obviously.
No, they've done a really good job.
They've done a really good job.
The nice thing about, Dr. Corey and Dr. Merrick, they're open to hearing
absolutely
other practitioners, and they're learning a tremendous amount from, doctors like us. So
no question. That's where you learn it from. I think these slides are going to be available, but since this is such a fantastic topic and subject, I'm going to do my best to produce this video, and of course it'll be out on the notification to the blog, so try to get that done next couple of days.
I'll get the slide deck over to you all. The nice thing about the slide deck too is there's links for all those references. I know I went through that very quickly just because there's so much information, but the links are workable.
And what I'll do is I'll put it up on our website and make it linkable, so it'll be in the blog and people will be able to download it. But I found the page on the protocols, and
okay,
it was under providers and somewhere in there. So I put that link out on the chat as well. Very important information. But you'll be back tomorrow night. We'll have a lot of repeat folks who would just want to really absorb this, and we'll have some new folks as well.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I laud your efforts. I mean, anything we can do to help, and we're very scientific. These are mostly doctors, citizen scientists and doctors. And so when we present, we try to present just like you did today, with as much evidence-based information as you possibly can glean.
And Dr. Lewis mainly, but I've co-authored with him on a couple, but he's written numerous, papers. So again, with some of the things that you were talking about in terms of, actually doing studies, I think we could definitely do something along those lines, especially with the biomarkers that we follow. I think that would really be an incredible study.
I'm not a researcher doing clinical trials or anything like that. I'm more of a translator. So, my mentor just pointed me in the right direction. And so that's where I just dive into it as deeply as I can. But we have a tradition on our webinars. Dr. David Harshfield will introduce himself, and he, what we call, lands the plane at the end of every one of our webinars. So with that, Dr. Harshfield.
Joel, thank you so much for your contribution, your sacrifice. I mean, medicine, sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug. And sometimes it takes something like this to get us focused. You're a good man to do. Thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I will say something that we did a lot of regenerative medicine, which includes cell therapy. And these biologics that we're using from amnion, perinatal tissues, we used about 1.5 years ago. And Direct Biologics is the name of the company. We did IV infusion and inhalation of these little nanoparticles. And what we found this is for chronic long haulers before the vaccine injury thing happened. These folks got better. And in addition to the cardiopulmonary improving, people that had knee pain said, hey, my knee doesn't hurt anymore, which tells us a lot of knee arthritis and so forth is really just inflammation. So, and being an orthopedic surgeon, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's trying to tease out, well, I'm doing an MR on someone's knee and I see a meniscal tear. Is it in its instability creating this, or is it inflammatory? We treated these folks for long haul COVID symptoms, and their knee pain and back pain improves. So it tells us we're turning the inflammation down. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to join with us, and let's look at treating these folks with the jab injuries to see if it's not a similar issue, probably turned up to 10. Let's see if we can't give them some of this IV and inhalation therapy, which we're going to do for traumatic brain injury and neurodegenerative issues. But you talked about the spinal cord inflammatory problem, same sort of an issue. And let's see if we can't piece together a protocol to provide some IV and inhalation administration of these exosomes for these folks.
And David, I think an important point is compared to IVIG, even though what you're doing is not inexpensive, it's probably less expensive than IVIG by a considerable margin.
Yeah. And these companies are going to help fund these projects. And the research you provided, that is excellent. I mean, we need to keep our minds open because the early research, you know, a year from now and 12 years and 25 years from now, it's going to change. So we're not just going to hang our hats on every single paper, but this is all we have. And that's an excellent collection of the existing literature on these problems. And we'll just grow together. And the next paper might say something different. We got open minds here. So Joel, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Good enough, folks. We'll end for now and see you on Tuesday evening, 8 p.m. Eastern. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Looking
Thanks
forward
again.
to it.
All righty.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.